Chapter 81. Entry Competition. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Within this vast region of the Northern Spiritual Realm, it was hard for the variety of large and small commonplace events to attract the interest of others. However, there was one event that was considered to be a rare and grand event within the Northern Spiritual Realm. That was the Northern Spiritual Academy's entry competition. During this competition, they would decide the home for the entry into the 5 great academies. Within the eyes of all the forces in the Northern Spiritual Realm, the 5 great academies were basically an incomprehensible and massive existence. They could not imagine what sort of background and terrifying power it possesses. The only thing that they did know was that they couldn't even be considered as ants in the eyes of the 5 great academies. This is why almost everybody would attempt to let their child enter this massive existence. They were clear that their achievements would far surpass any ordinary person if they managed to enter the 5 great academies. Although the Northern Spiritual Realm was considered a vast region, it was still a relatively remote place within the endless Great Thousand World. If they truly want to experience the brilliance of the Great Thousand World, they must first pass through the path of the 5 great academies. Thus, the Northern Spiritual City would become the most dazzling and bustling location whenever the Northern Spiritual Academy's entry competition was hosted. Even the 9 territories' territory lords would personally come over. This was because it was an extremely important matter to them. As long as their children are able to stand out and obtain an entry within the competition, their reputation would improve. Moreover, they would enjoy the envious gazes of other people. This comfortable feeling was not something that could be achieved through the daily expansion of their territory. Today, the Northern Spiritual City was undoubtedly in a state of being inflated. The massive city was crowded and many noisy sounds gathered. The sounds soared through the clouds and could be heard within a radius of 100 miles. The venue for the entry competition was set in the Northern Spiritual City's northwest area's Northern Spiritual Square. It was considered to be the most spacious location within the Northern Spiritual City and could accommodate 100,000 people. However, the spacious venue has already long been occupied by the crowd. Looking at it, the sea of humans filled the venue to the limits. Even the tall buildings near the square were filled with figures. Inside the square, all the students in the Northern Spiritual Academy were gathered there and were all excited. Wasn't the reason why they came to train in the Northern Spiritual Academy the wish of being qualified for this sort of competition one day? Although they weren't good enough to be in the competition right now, they could still take the opportunity to observe it. Moreover, they would be able to assess how powerful the students that were participating in it were. In front of the Northern Spiritual Square, there were also a few rather prominent and special seats. Currently, the seats were all filled with people. Every single one of them had an extraordinarily imposing manner as well as dense spiritual energy. As they glanced around, their might was revealed. It was the 9 territory lords of the Northern Spiritual Realm. Huh, Brother Mu. You came really early. It's said that little guy, Mu Chen, is also participating in it this time, right? I haven't seen that little guy in a while, but I've heard from Qianer that he is very amazing. In front of the seats, sounds of laughter rang out. A few individuals glanced over and noticed a middle-aged man smiling. Everybody immediately recognized him. It was the Tang Territory's territory lord, Tang Shan. Mu Feng smiled as he cupped his head towards Tang Shan and said, "How could that boy be powerful? He just likes showing off in front of girls." Mu Feng had a pretty good relationship with Tang Shan. Although the 2 territories weren't allies, they would often cooperate with each other. That girl, Qianer, has only broken through to the spiritual rotation stage a few days ago. I wonder if she will be able to pass this time. Tang Shan was a bit worried. Although Tang Qianer was quite gifted, the ones participating in this entry competition were all outstanding individuals among their peers. It was not easy to win. Oh ho ho, I've heard that there is a seated entry this time. It's the first time that the Northern Spiritual Academy obtains it. It's impossible for Qianer to get it, but let's see if that little guy, Mu Chen, can obtain it. Tang Shan did not say much about this matter and his tone changed as he laughed. Mu Feng smiled, but just when he was about to speak, a mocking voice rang out from nearby. The Lu territory have pre-ordered this seated entry. We did not plan to let the others obtain it. Mu Feng turned around and glanced at the calm Lu Qingtian. He let out a faint laugh and said, "This isn't a queue for business. How could you talk about pre-ordering it? I've said it wrong. Your Mu territory shouldn't even dream of obtaining this seated entry." Lu Qingtian took a fleeting glance at Mu Feng and said, "You shouldn't say too much. Otherwise, wouldn't it be disgraceful for you when you can't retract back those words?" Mu Feng smiled and said, "Then let's see who will be the one that would be disgraced." Lu Qingtian sneered. A cold chill emerged within his eyes. "Just act all you want now. I'll see if you can laugh when Mubai beats your son half to death." The other territory lords nearby did not participate when they noticed the confrontation between Mu Feng and Lu Qingtian. They knew that the Mu territory and the Lu territory were incompatible with each other. Although there were few of them who were accustomed to Lu territory being so overbearing, the Lu territory was still the strongest force within the northern spiritual realm. Unless there is a need to do so, they did not want to offend them. Mu Feng retracted his gaze away from Lu Qingtian's body. It was useless to say anything right now. Although he knew that Lu Mubai was quite amazing, how could his son be an ordinary individual within his generation? Dong! After the bustling sounds lasted for half an hour within the northern spiritual square, a deep bell sound suddenly rang out and echoed throughout the entire city. As the bell sounded, countless gazes fixated itself in the direction of the northern spiritual square. At that location, 4 figures slowly appeared. The person in front was the Northern Spiritual Academy's Principal Shao. Behind him, Teacher Mo and Teacher Shi were closely following him. Moreover, there was a rather unfamiliar old man amongst them. He seemed to have a lazy appearance and did not pay the slightest attention as he glanced at the 9 territory lords. "Oh ho ho, I would like to thank everybody for coming today. We are considered to be acquaintances, so I will not say any superfluous words to annoy you." Principal Shao cupped his fists in the direction of the 9 territory lords and smiled. Seeing this, Mu Feng and the others hurriedly cupped their hands to return a salute. Although Principal Shao kept a low profile within the northern spiritual realm, no force would dare to underestimate him. Not to mention the peerless identity of the neutral Northern Spiritual Academy, there weren't more than 3 individuals who could surpass his strength amongst the 9 territory lords. Of course, I'll introduce the referee of the Northern Spiritual Academy's entry competition this time. He has the final say over all the rules. Principal Shao cupped his hands towards the seemingly lazy old man nearby. He immediately smiled and said, "Everybody, this is Mr. Hao from the 5 great academies. He will be supervising the entry competition this time." From the 5 great academies. Mu Feng and the others were shocked and they heard this remark. They quickly stood up and cupped their hands towards this old man. Every single individual that came out from the 5 great academies was an all-powerful individual. They were not to be underestimated. The old man known as Mr. Hao only directed a nod towards Mu Feng. This attitude was not considered to be polite, yet the 9 territory lords could only chuckle dryly. His background of the 5 great academies was enough to overwhelm them. "Let's begin." Mr. Hao nodded at Principal Shao and said. Hearing this, Principal Shao also smiled and glanced at the entire venue. Under his dense spiritual energy, his voice resounded in everybody's ears. For the entry competition this time, there are a total of 12 individuals participating. 5 from the East Branch and 7 from the West Branch. There will be 5 ordinary entries and 1 seated entry. The 12 individuals will split up into 6 matches and fight with each other. The winner will be able to obtain the qualifications of the ordinary entry. Of course, if anyone would like to obtain the seated entry, they can challenge once again. The final winner will be able to obtain this seeded entry. Principal Zhao's gaze looked towards the students from the east and west branches and he said. Is there any problems? No, that's good. The students that are participating in the competition should come up onto the venue. Just as Principal Zhao's voice faded away, a commotion rang out from the east and west branch. Under numerous envious gazes, a group of figures surged out and landed on the venue. Brother Mu, good luck. Go seize that seeded entry. From the east branch, Su Ling, Tan Qingshan and the others shouted out while being excited. Mu Qin directed a smile at them as he waved. Seeded entry. I'm afraid you don't have the right to get it. At the opposite side, Lu Mubai tilted his head slightly and stared coldly at Mu Qin as he gently spoke. Won't we know if I have the right to obtain it later on? Mu Qin smiled and replied. You think you have the right to fight against Brother Lu? Beside Lu Mubai, a boy sneered and spoke. He was the one who had a conflict with Mu Qin during the Northern Spiritual Field, Chen Tong. However, the current him seemed to have broken through to the spiritual rotation stage after Teacher Shi's training. This made his confidence soar and he did not have the fear that he initially had when facing Mu Qin. Mu Qin only glanced at Chen Tong and ignored him. A person, who had just advanced to the spiritual rotation stage, wasn't someone worthy of his attention. And when Chen Tong noticed that Mu Qin had directly ignored him, he gritted his teeth in hatred. He thought that he must punish him if he meets him later on. For this entry competition, we will follow the old rules. We will decide the opponents through lots. Principal Xiao waved his hand and the person holding the bamboo lots ran up. Mu Qin and the others extended their hands and each of them picked a bamboo lot from him. When they noticed that they were drawing lots, the numerous gazes fixated over at that location. The fierce entry competition was about to begin. Chapter 82 Complete Victory. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 82 Complete Victory. Mu Qin stared at the lot within his hands. A number, 1, was written on the lot. Then, he lifted up the bamboo lot. The others, seeing this, also raised the bamboo lot that they just drew. How interesting that I was only thinking about it earlier. Chen Tong smiled hypocritically as he stared at Mu Qin. Then, he arrogantly lifted up the bamboo lot within his hand. It was the same number as Mu Qin. Apparently, he was Mu Qin's opponent. Mu Qin stared at Chen Tong, who was arrogantly smiling, and shook his head helplessly. That idiot. Chen Fan and the others grinned. They felt pitiful as they directed a smile towards Mu Qin. The two of them weren't even opponents for Mu Qin right now. Moreover, Chen Tong was probably even weaker than them by a bit. They really didn't know how foolish this person was. How could he still reveal this sort of smile at this moment? It's over. Besides them, Mo Ling's face turned pale and he smiled bitterly. He raised the bamboo lot within his hand and said, My opponent is Lu Mubai. Ah! Chen Fan, Tang Qianer and the others all looked sympathetically at Mo Ling. Amongst the 12 participants of the entry competition, there was no doubt that Mu Qin and Lu Mubai were the hardest to defeat. Since Mo Ling had to fight against Lu Mubai immediately, he was indeed quite unlucky. It's fine. For this entry competition, the outcome is related to the entry. However, it doesn't mean that you're completely out of luck if you lose. Mu Qin patted Mo Ling's shoulders, yet his eyes glanced at the platform towards Mr. Hao, who was from the 5 great academies. He said, Your current strength has already reached the requirements for the 5 great academies. Therefore, even if you lose, it's possible for you to get an extra chance if you are able to prove how different you are from the others. Really? Mo Ling hesitated for a moment before quickly asking. Mu Qin nodded his head and said. Of course, but as for how you will impress him will depend on yourself. Mo Ling nodded his head gratefully. The entry was equally important to him. If he failed this time, he would no longer be allowed to enter the 5 great academies. It was his final chance. Dong! A bell sound rang once again within the northern spiritual square. Chen Fan, Tang Qianer and the others looked at the bamboo lots they drew and slowly backed off. Right now, this first match should be Mu Chen against Chen Tong. As they moved away, numerous gazes instantly gathered at the two figures within the stage. Oh ho ho, I never imagined that Mu Chen would be in the first match. Tang Shan looked at the two individuals on the stage and said as he smiled. Mu Feng also smiled and nodded his head. Naturally, he could tell that Mu Chen was at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase. Although his opponent was the same level as him, Mu Chen should still be able to defeat such an opponent. Moreover, if Mu Chen were to win this match, he would at least obtain the entry to the 5 great academies. So he's that Mu Chen. On the main platform, Mr. Hao, who seemed to be lazy, suddenly straightened up his body. He looked peculiarly at the handsome boy at the stage. Beside him, Principal Xiao smiled and nodded his head. He looks like a gentle and peaceful boy that I never thought that he would actually do all those things. You really can't judge a person through his appearance. Mr. Hao stared in interest at Mu Chen and muttered these words. I hope that this little guy will not disappoint me. Otherwise, I came here for no reason. At the side, Principal Xiao was quite curious when he heard these words. However, he did not ask about it. He could only try to figure out within his heart just what sort of shocking thing Mu Chen had done in the spiritual road that made the 5 great academies concerned about him. I've said that sometimes people would be unlucky. It really is unreasonable. On the much-anticipated stage, Chen Tong smiled as he looked at Mu Chen. He was still thinking about punishing this guy earlier. Who would have imagined that the opportunity to do so would appear in the next instant? Mu Chen stared helplessly at the arrogant Chen Tong. He could not help but shake his head. This guy is quite foolish. Can you stop talking? Mu Chen sighed and said. Seeing Mu Chen's disregarding attitude, Chen Tong gnashed his teeth. This guy always had an appearance that angers others. Mu Chen. This time, I won't let you act this arrogant. Chen Tong shouted out. Dense spiritual energy surged out from within his body. The extent of this power made many Northern Spiritual Academy's students secretly click their tongues. As expected, this person had advanced to the spiritual rotation stage. Swish. His toes touched the ground and his body moved swiftly. Spiritual energy erupted out from both palms and a faint burning fluctuation emitted out. Fiery Heartbreak Palm. Chen Tong emerged directly in front of Mu Chen. A fiery energy gathered at the center of his palm. It was like a mass of extremely hot flames. Then, it carried violent winds as it shot off in anger towards Mu Chen's chest. Mu Chen glanced at him casually and raised his hand. Smack. A crisp sound suddenly resounded out from the stage. The palm that Chen Tong had fired off suddenly froze in midair. He was stunned as he stared at the boy, who directly a helpless smile, in front of him. He immediately felt a burning sensation coming from his face. He was suddenly slapped mysteriously. This. Surprised voices also broke out from outside the stage. Many people did not even see what had exactly happened. They could only see a handprint emerging on Chen Tong's face and hear the crisp sound of a slap. What a fast speed! Only the ones with extraordinary eyesight muttered to themselves with a serious expression. They could vaguely see the lightning speed attack during that instant. I'll kill you. Although he did not understand what had happened, the pain from his face made Chen Tong's eyes turn red. He looked ferociously at Mu Chen and the spiritual energy within his body was released unreservedly. The palm winds were like fire sweeping through the place as it bombarded towards Mu Chen. However, Mu Chen only moved slowly against this fierce offensive. It was like a stroll and he allowed Chen Tong to attack him crazily, yet it did not even touch his clothes. The scene on the stage looked quite funny. One of them was crazily attacking while the other was walking around relaxed. It was like a boat following and rising with the waves within a storm. At this moment, even the ordinary individuals could see the difference between the two of them. It seems that the two individuals were not at the same level. What a mysterious movement ability, that Mu Chen isn't simple at all. A few powerful individuals nodded in surprise. He could actually act so relaxed during a spiritual rotation stage's berserk attacks. This wasn't something that anybody could do. Lu Mubai watched this scene coldly. He was quite surprised about Mu Chen's speed. However, he immediately grinned. It would only be interesting if it's like this, otherwise, wouldn't he feel bored about it? Do you only know how to dodge? Seeing that his attacks were to no avail after a long period of time, Chen Tong immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. It was too hard to bear when every attack of his missed. Mu Chen finally stopped moving. His black eyes stared undisturbedly at Chen Tong. Pyroblast Spirit Fist. Seeing that Mu Chen had stopped moving, Chen Tong's eyes were filled with delight. He immediately took a step forward and his spiritual energy rushed out endlessly from within his body. Layers of flame accumulated on his fist as it fiercely blasted off towards Mu Chen. Since there was an opportunity, he must use all his strength in this attack to defeat this person. This thought flashed through Chen Tong's mind. Then, he noticed Mu Chen also clenching his fists in front of him. Then, his arm fired off directly like a spear. Boom! Wrapped by a dark black spiritual energy, Mu Chen's fist collided with Chen Tong's all-out attack without the slightest signs of dodging. A deep sound suddenly resounded through the sky. With the two individuals as the center, a violent blast of air spread out. Mu Chen's body remained motionless, but Chen Tong's face turned red. In the next instant, his body trembled and flew backwards under many astonished gazes. He brushed against the ground for a dozen meters before finally stopping. How is that possible? Chen Tong lifted his head. His face was filled with an incredulous expression. Both Mu Chen and he were at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase. Why is it that he couldn't even block one attack from Mu Chen? I won't believe it. Chen Tong's eyes turned red. With a low cry, he fiercely attacked again. Swish! Just when he was about to charge out, a ghost-like black figure appeared in front of him. Before he could even react, a cold hand was pressed onto his throat. Feeling the cold hand on his throat, Chen Tong was suddenly shocked and froze. He stared at the boy's face that was close to him. The originally gentle face had become cold and heartless. Those indifferent eyes made his heart jump and he could feel that he was being stared by a cheetah. I surrender. Chen Tong swallowed his saliva and said while quivering. He finally understood the difference between the two of them. Although he had advanced into the spiritual rotation stage, he wasn't Mu Chen's opponent at all. Mu Chen glanced at him. He did not seem to care about him and slowly released his hand. Brother Mu is amazing. As Mu Chen released his hand, a commotion instantly burst out from outside the stage. The East Branch students, especially Su Ling, Tan Qingshan and the others could not help but excitedly shout out. They weren't able to see the battle clearly, yet they could tell that the arrogant Chen Tong was completely overwhelmed by Mu Chen. Hearing their cheers, Mu Chen directed a smile towards them. Then, he suddenly felt something and turned his head around. His line of sight landed at the direction of Lu Mubai. At this moment, Lu Mubai had crossed his arms and was staring at Mu Chen like he was something interesting. That appearance was just like a wolf that had found a prey. Lu Mubai noticed Mu Chen looking over and smiled. Then, his lips moved slightly. Mu Chen's eyes narrowed. He could tell what Lu Mubai wanted to say to him. You will end up as pitiful as him. Mu Chen replied back with a smile as his eyes turned cold. I'll be waiting for it. Chapter 83 Battle for the Entries. You're listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 83 Battle for the Entries. The entry competition's first match ended with Mu Chen utterly crushing Chen Tong. This fight surprised many of the audience. Although the battle did not last long, the people that were capable of discerning it could tell how powerful the boy named Mu Chen is. They were both at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase, yet the strength they exhibited on the stage were at a completely different level. That Mu Chen is the son of the Mu territory lord, Mu Feng, right? He is indeed quite capable. It was said that he was the only one who obtained the qualifications to the spiritual road, within the northern spiritual realm. However, something happened and he was kicked out from it. Judging from his appearance, the boy is quite extraordinary. With such abilities, he shouldn't be too bad within the spiritual road, right? Who knows why he was kicked out? But with his abilities, it shouldn't be difficult for him to enter the 5 great academies. Outside of the northern spiritual square, many whispers spread out. It was evident that other people are starting to notice the boy from the earlier battle, who had once caused a commotion within the northern spiritual realm. Mu Chen did not care much about the various gazes that were sent over and returned to the East Branch's seats. At the same time, Lu Mubai stood up from the West Branch's seats with a calm expression and walked towards the stage. From the East Branch, numerous gazes were directed at Mo Ling, who had become pale. Mu Chen gently patted his shoulder. Only then did Mo Ling grit his teeth and walked up. Lu Mubai glanced at Mu Chen calmly before turning his gaze towards Mo Ling, who was walking onto the stage. He lowered his head and fixed his sleeves as he said, "You should just concede." Mo Ling was suppressed by the pressure coming from Lu Mubai, but immediately gritted his teeth and said, "Please instruct me." Lu Mubai's eyes were calm and indifferent as he shook his head and said, "You really don't appreciate my kindness." Facing Lu Mubai's attitude, Mo Ling's face were changing alternately to blue and red. However, the other person was definitely strong. He simply had no other method, he was going to lose in this battle for sure. The only thing he could do was to not to lost too badly. Mo Ling took a deep breath and clenched his hands tightly. Spiritual energy flowed out from his body and he felt his body filled with energy. Afterwards, Mo Ling finally had a little bit of confidence and took a step forward. He initiated the attack and headed straight towards Lu Mubai. Mo Ling's strength was actually considered to be quite decent. Even amongst the Northern Spiritual Academy's heaven class, he was ranked rather up front. However, he knew that Lu Mubai, who was in front of him, had always dominated the title of the strongest Northern Spiritual Academy student all these years and nobody was able to shake that title. Against such an opponent, there wasn't the slightest chance of winning if he didn't go all out from the beginning. Lu Mubai looked calmly at Mo Ling charging over. His body tilted slightly forward and an explosion rang out from beneath his feet. His figure instantly turned into a red light as he rushed over. His speed was extremely fast, even Mo Ling was only able to see the red light flash as it emerged. Then, he was horrified to see Lu Mubai appearing in front of him. A slim palm gently smashed over and landed on Mo Ling's chest. He did not even have the time to defend against it as the volcanic spiritual energy erupted. Bang! A muffled sound emitted out. Mo Ling, who was in a position of charging forward earlier, instantly flew back. Fresh blood sprayed out as he awkwardly brushed on the ground. Wah! This scene directly caused numerous uproars from the onlookers. Mo Ling, who had reached the spiritual rotation stage initial phase, didn't even have a chance to attack in front of Lu Mubai. What a terrifying strength! Su Ling and the others gulped. The title of the strongest Northern Spiritual Academy student wasn't just for show. Mu Chen also stared at the stage. When Lu Mubai had attacked previously, his eyes focused slightly. Lu Mubai's speed was not inferior to his. He was indeed quite powerful. They aren't at the same level. Beside him, Chen Fan and the others sighed. It was just like earlier when Mu Chen had fought against Chen Tong. The current Mo Ling and Lu Mubai were at a completely different level. On the stage, Lu Mubai stared indifferently at the awkward Mo Ling. A hint of disdain emerged on his mouth and he turned away to leave. In a battle where he completely oppressed the other, it didn't feel great at all. Wait. A hoarse voice came out from behind. Lu Mubai frowned and turned around. He could see Mo Ling wiping the blood from his mouth and stood up while wobbling. He gritted his teeth and said, "I haven't lost yet." Lu Mubai's eyes slowly darkened. Under Lu Mubai's dark eyes, Mo Ling circulated his spiritual energy within his body and charged over to Lu Mubai. Boom! A muffled sound rang out once again. Lu Mubai moved like a lightning and emerged at the right side of Mo Ling. With a kick that was like a spear, he fiercely kicked Mo Ling's waist. Poochie! Mo Ling flew backwards again. Fresh blood sprayed out and it was obvious that he was quite helpless. However, just when everybody sighed in regret, they were surprised to see Mo Ling gritting his teeth as he stood up once again while trembling. "Oh ho ho, good. You're quite stubborn." Seeing Mo Ling clinging at him obstinately, Lu Mubai laughed due to his rage. This time, he did not give Mo Ling an opportunity to initiate an attack. His feet stomped onto the ground as he charged out. Bang! Mo Ling's body was directly sent flying by Lu Mubai's palm. Bang! Before Mo Ling could even stand up, Lu Mubai's figure had rushed out again. His eyes were dark and he kicked Mo Ling in the waist and sent him flying a dozen meters as if he was garbage. Countless people watched as Lu Mubai continued to attack the helpless Mo Ling. But even so, that boy continued to grit his teeth and endured. Although his face had turned pale, he still refused to surrender. What a tenacious boy! A few people secretly sighed. Although Mo Ling's strength was incomparable against Lu Mubai, the courage to fight against him when he knew he was in a completely different level was still quite surprising. At the East Branch's side, all the students watched Mo Ling, who refused to admit defeat, as he was kicked around. They were all silent. A few students even tilted their heads away and could not bear to watch anymore. It was too cruel. Motherf *Ker. Chen Fan gritted his teeth. It would be fine if Lu Mubai had knocked out Mo Ling and threw him off the stage. However, this way of insulting others was going overboard. Tang Qianair also gently gritted her teeth. She moved her gaze away from the stage and whispered, "Should we just let him surrender? If he surrenders now, Mo Ling wouldn't have the slightest chance of obtaining an entry." Mu Chen said gently. His eyes swept past the main platform. At that location, Mr. Hao was frowning as he watched the stage. It was impossible to tell whether he was delighted or furious based on his expression. But Tang Qianair still wanted to say more. This is the method he chose. Perhaps his strength could not compare with Lu Mubai, but his courage would help him obtain dignity and pride. There is something called guts. If a man doesn't have this deep down inside, he would be a weakling no matter how powerful his spiritual energy is. He would be looked down by others. Mu Chen said in a calm voice. There was nothing Tang Qianair could say. Although she did not understand why men would have to struggle even if they had to die, those men were indeed quite attractive to the girls. This one-sided battle lasted for nearly 10 minutes. At that moment, Mo Ling was completely covered with blood. His consciousness was also quite blurry. However, he used his willpower and endured it. Lu Mubai's face had already turned completely dark. This sort of battle brought no benefits to him. He knew that when he heard sounds of whispers appearing from time to time. Lu Mubai stared at Mo Ling and a hint of killing intent emerged within his eyes. Since you can't be sensible, I'll destroy you. But just when Lu Mubai was about to deliver the killing blow, Mr. Hao gently waved his hand on the main platform. Principal Xiao immediately shouted out, "The battle is over, Lu Mubai wins." Hearing this, Lu Mubai glared fiercely at Mo Ling, who was almost unconscious. He could only leave while waving his sleeves in anger. As he left the stage, he glanced coldly at Mu Chen. Apparently, he thought that this was Mu Chen's idea to deliberately trouble him. Seeing that the match was over, a few students from the East Branch carried the unconscious Mo Ling down from the stage. "It's my turn next." Chen Fan gritted his teeth and angrily stepped onto the stage. His opponent was a rather well-known student from the West Branch. They were both at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase. However, this student lacked combat experience compared to Chen Fan, who had joined an adventurers team. It couldn't be seen at the start of the battle. However, as the battle gradually intensified, it was slowly revealed. In the end, Chen Fan finally discovered a flaw and seized the opportunity to defeat his opponent in one attack. Following Chen Fan was Hui Yun. He, too, obtained victory just as anticipated from the start. And the final match was Tang Qianer's fight. The match made many eyes lit up. This was because her opponent was the West Branch's Hong Ling. The two Northern Spiritual Academy's flowers would actually clash with each other. It was evident that two beautiful girls fighting were more likely to attract attention. This attention surpassed even the matches of Mu Chen and Lu Mubai. It could be seen that a beauty's attractiveness would always be the strongest. This battle was not brutal nor bloody. However, everybody still watched intently. The girls' gentle methods were like butterflies flying around. Even the attacks that would take one's life would still become graceful in their hands. Tang Qianer and Hong Ling's strength were equally matched. Although they had their own means of attacking, they failed to determine the winner. In the end, Mr. Hao opened his mouth and the match between the two of them actually ended up in a draw. As it was a draw, everybody was shocked. There were only this many entries. How would they allocate it if it was a draw? But since this was said by Mr. Hao, they could only keep this question deep down in their hearts. With the end of this battle, the Northern Spiritual Square's atmosphere quietly rose. Even the powerful powerhouses casted their gaze over with great interest. This is because, next up, it was the fight for the seeded entry. After all these battles, they could tell that there were only two students among the group, who could compete for the seeded entry. Mu Chen and Lu Mubai. And coincidentally, these two individuals were the Mu Territory's Little Lord and Lu Territory's Little Master. The relationship between these two territories was quite terrible. In another perspective, this seeded entry competition would be a battle between the two territories. However, they just didn't know who exactly would have the final laugh. Chapter 84 Fierce Struggle Between a Tiger and a Dragon. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 84 Fierce Struggle Between a Tiger and a Dragon. In the massive Northern Spiritual Square, the atmosphere was becoming heated up. Numerous gazes looked eagerly at the stage, waiting for the true fierce struggle between a tiger and a dragon. Under the audience's eyes, Lu Mubai's body moved and was first to land on the stage. His cold eyes stared at Mu Chen, who was at the East Branch. The corner of his mouth twitched as he could not wait it to start. He wanted to see just how wonderful the expressions of the people, who believed in Mu Chen, would be when Mu Chen was defeated. Mu Chen also looked at Lu Mubai's cold smile and calmly headed up to the stage. He stood at a place near Lu Mubai. "Brother Mu, good luck." Su Ling and the others' faces turned red as they shouted. Although they knew how powerful Lu Mubai was, they still had quite the confidence in Mu Chen. This day has finally come. Lu Mubai gently twisted his neck and stared at Mu Chen. A smile actually emerged on his face. However, underneath that smile was a hint of coldness. It seems that he has endured for a long time for the scene today. "You're not afraid of it becoming twisted?" Mu Chen said with a soft laugh. "I'll waste you." Lu Mubai shrugged and said with a smile. "If I get the chance, I'll do the same to you." Mu Chen nodded his head and replied seriously. Lu Mubai smiled as he looked at Mu Chen. The latter also seriously stared at him. The atmosphere may seem quite gentle, yet the cold chill flowing through the depths of their eyes made others freeze. It seems that Mu Chen is the only one who could compete with Lu Mubai for the seeded entry. Tang Territory's territory lord looked at the two individuals facing off. He could help but speak. These two individuals were already considered to be the most outstanding individuals among the younger generation within the northern spiritual realm. But based on what I know, Lu Mubai is probably at the spiritual rotation stage middle phase. Moreover, with those powerful spiritual arts from Lu territory he read through, his combat ability is quite extraordinary. Mu Chen is only at the spiritual rotation stage initial phase, so he's at a disadvantage. Tang Shan looked towards Mu Feng. After all, they had a pretty good relationship with each other. At this moment, he was naturally biased towards Mu Chen. Hearing these words, Mu Feng said with a faint smile. The boy from the Lu family is quite capable. However, Mu Chen isn't a weakling that could be defeated by just anybody. Although Mu Feng recognized Lu Mubai's ability, he also had confidence that his son wouldn't be any weaker than him. Since that's the case, I hope to see a decent match. Tang Shan said with a chuckle. On the other side of the seats, Lu Qingtian seemed to have heard Mu Feng's words. He instantly made a mocking smile and waited for the show to begin. What a foolish dream. At the main platform, Mr. Hao from the 5 Great Academies stared at the two individuals in the stage. He finally straightened up his body and did not act this lazily anymore. His pair of muddy eyes finally showed a tiny bit of interest. So that main event is finally about to begin. Principal Xiao also nodded his head. Then, he stood up while his eyes remained fixated at the stage. His eyes paused for a moment as he stared at Mu Chen and Lu Mubai's body before he gently waved his hand. The competition for the seeded entry officially begins. Boom! The instant Principal Zhao's voice emerged, two powerful spiritual energies seemed to have erupted out from the stage at the same time. It brought forth bursts of wind spiraling. Two pair of cold eyes would flash as it seemed to bypass the dense spiritual energy surrounding the bodies and intertwined with each other. Swish! The two figures also rushed out at this moment. A black figure and red figure ripped through the obstruction of the air and directly charged forward. They did not show any signs of dodging and collided with each other at the center of the stage in a couple of seconds. Dong! A violent spiritual energy shock wave erupted out during the instant they collided. The solid ground shattered and tiny cracks emerged. The intensity of their spiritual energy was absolutely not something an ordinary spiritual rotation stage initial phase could compare with. Interesting. Lu Mubai licked his lips gently. The eyes that he used to stare at Mu Chen were as if he had met a prey that caught his interest. In the next instant, his eyes turned cold and fiery red spiritual energy wrapped around his legs like flames. With the sound of an explosion coming out from beneath his feet, he charged out like a fiery red figure. This speed was just like a lightning bolt and caused countless cries to appear from the surroundings. That's the Lu territory's blaze step. It's a spiritual tier low rank movement spiritual art. I never expected that Lu Mubai would actually be able to learn it. Tang Shan stared at the flames from underneath Lu Mubai's feet and exclaimed slightly. Under many gazes, the fiery red figure seemed to have instantly appeared behind Mu Chen. Afterwards, a palm was fired off. At the center of the palm, fiery red spiritual energy surged out and it was extremely violent. Swoosh! However, Mu Chen's body trembled slightly when Lu Mubai was about to successfully land his attack on Mu Chen's back. Following this, Lu Mubai's attack passed directly through his body. An afterimage. Lu Mubai's eyes immediately focused when he noticed that his attack missed. He did not hesitate and took advantage of his miss in order to kick behind him like a spear. An enormous gale blew out. Boom! A deep voice sounded out from behind. Without anybody noticing, Mu Chen had appeared behind Lu Mubai and his fist wrapped with black spiritual energy collided with Lu Mubai's kick. Pretty good movements you have there. Lu Mubai sneered. He leapt up to the sky as fiery red spiritual energy flashed at the soles of his feet. Turning around, he fired off numerous fists towards Mu Chen. Each of these fists contained violent spiritual energy and brought forth numerous winds as it enshrouded Mu Chen. Against Lu Mubai's fierce offensive, Mu Chen's body moved and dodged like a ghost. After images would vaguely appear and it was impossible for others to capture his dodging trajectories. Ha, what a mysterious movement ability. Seeing Mu Chen's movement abilities, Tang Shan's eyes lit up. With his keen eyesight, he could naturally tell that Mu Chen was displaying a rather mysterious movement spiritual art. Mu Feng was also surprised when he saw Mu Chen's movements. He was quite unfamiliar with this movement ability and it was definitely not taught by him. It seems that it must have come from the Northern Spiritual Academy. Bang bang bang. Lu Mubai's offensive was extremely fierce. He was in hot pursuit, yet Mu Chen relied on the mysterious movement in order to avoid endlessly. He completely evaded all the attacks brought out by Lu Mubai. The two of them on the stage had pushed their strength to the very limits. It was still fine for the powerful individuals. However, students like Su Ling and the others could only see blurry red and black shadows flashing around the stage. Their faces were completely filled with shock. After chasing Mu Chen for so long with no avail, Lu Mubai's eyes turned completely dark. He pondered for a moment and spiritual energy surged out from his body. His speed instantly increased and he caught up with Mu Chen's ghost dot-like figure. Swish! But during the moment he had just caught up, Mu Chen's body suddenly stopped. Two fingers remained straight up and had instantly turned into a gold color. It flashed dazzlingly and emitted an extremely sharp fluctuation. Mu Chen's fingers tore through the air and ruthlessly headed towards Lu Mubai's throat. Mu Chen's sudden change from defense to offense surprised Lu Mubai. However, he did not panic and straightened two of his fingers. A fiery red spiritual wrapped around it like flames and it seemed extraordinarily brutal. The gold fingers and fiery red fingers were thrusted out. In the next instant, they collided heavily together. Clang! The collision of the fingers was like metal colliding with each other. A crisp sound actually broke out and sparks flew out both fingers. It was visible that their fingers had changed forms. Mu Chen's eyes were cold as he formed finger seals with both hands. His fingers sparkled like gold and he activated the Spirit King finger. Two golden spears accompanied with finger seals charged fiercely at Lu Mubai. Swish! And while facing Mu Chen's fierce offensive, Lu Mubai sneered and fiery red spiritual energy emitted out. Four of his fingers remained straightened as he stabbed at Mu Chen. The golden light and fiery light seemed to have enshrouded their bodies. Everybody could see that each of the finger seals formed had a lethal power. Countless individuals held their breaths as they watched the two figures colliding against each other with their fingers. This sort of collision wasn't something that even a spiritual rotation stage middle phase could do. Clang! Another collision between their fingers appeared. Mu Chen and Lu Mubai both had to took a step backwards. From their fingertips, blood actually dripped down. It was evident that the collision had caused them a bit of injuries. Mu Chen's cold eyes remained fixated at Lu Mubai's body. The latter was indeed quite powerful. He couldn't achieve any results even with such an offensive. Apparently, it wasn't enough to obtain victory like this. Mu Chen took a deep breath and his body suddenly retreated backwards. His hands also retreated back into his sleeves. And most surprisingly, he even actually closed his eyes slowly. Mu Chen's strange action instantly aroused a commotion from the audience. It was evident that they did not understand what he was doing. This. Tang Shan looked suspiciously at Mu Feng. Wouldn't it give an opportunity to his opponent if he closed his eyes right now? Mu Feng also frowned. He was unclear what Mu Chen was planning to do. Trying to act all mysterious, go to hell. Lu Mubai's eyes narrowed. He immediately sneered and rushed out towards Mu Chen. But against his offensive, Mu Chen did not show any signs of dodging. Although he closed his eyes, he still pushed the shadow spirit step to the extreme. A few confusing afterimages were brought out and he evaded Lu Mubai's attacks. Lu Mubai did not hold back because of the strange state that Mu Chen was in. His attacks became fiercer and gradually blocked Mu Chen off. But just when he was prepared to shut down Mu Chen's escape path, he did not notice that dozens of spiritual seals had emerged from Mu Chen's hands that were hidden by his sleeves. It silently integrated into the air. At the stage, Mu Chen, who had always been evading, suddenly stopped. He stared at Lu Mubai as he rushed over and had a faint smile on his handsome face. He gently placed his hands together and formed a strange seal. At the main platform, Mr. Hao stared at the seal formed by Mu Chen's hands and his eyes focused completely. This is a spiritual array's seal. Chapter 85. Hidden cards revealed. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Under everybody's astonished gazes, Mu Chen's hand suddenly formed a strange seal. Afterwards, his eyes suddenly focused. A dazzling red light suddenly erupted from the sky behind hand and formed a fiery red spiritual array that was the size of a dozen or so zhang tall. A spiritual array. Numerous individuals stood up at the northern spiritual square. They watched the spiritual array behind Mu Chen's back with incredulous eyes. The people with keen vision could even tell that the powerful fluctuations within the spiritual array had definitely reached the level of a rank 1 spiritual array. God, Mu Chen actually arranged a spiritual array. He's actually a rank 1 spiritual array master. How is that possible? Even for a rank 1 spiritual array master, they would require some time to quietly arrange an array. However, he's in a battle right now. Moreover, he even closed his eyes earlier. But this is definitely a rank 1 spiritual array. How is this possible? Shocked cries rang out from the northern spiritual square. Everybody's eyes were filled with shock and confusion. It was apparent that they did not know how Mu Chen was able to do this. Not only were they shocked, even the territory lords in the seats at front were completely surprised. Lu Qingtian even straightened up his body and had an extremely ugly expression. He never thought that the boy from the Mu territory, aside from having a decent strength, would actually have such a surprising hidden card up his sleeves. So Mu Chen is actually a spiritual array master. No wonder you were so confident. Tang Shan gradually recovered from the shock and praised him loudly. Then, he was somewhat puzzled and asked. However, how could he arrange an array this quickly even if he is a rank 1 spiritual array master? Mu Feng had a surprised expression as well. However, he quickly understood the reason behind it. He could not help but smile. Others might not be able to understand why Mu Chen could form a spiritual array this quickly, but he could guess vaguely why that happened. Is it the heart array state? It seems that Mu Chen is grasping and understanding the heart array state more and more. Mu Feng muttered to himself. That Mu Chen really hid his strength well. At the main platform, Principal Xiao also had a surprised expression. He could not help but smile. I never imagined that he was a rank 1 spiritual array master. Beside him, Teacher Mo also nodded his head. He had trained Mu Chen this long, yet he had not discovered it at all. This guy really knew how to conceal his hidden cards. Moreover, he isn't an ordinary spiritual array master. Mr. Hao's eyes flashed as he stared at the handsome boy on the stage. He could not conceal the shock within his voice. He seems to be able to enter the heart array state. Otherwise, it's absolutely impossible for him to close his eyes and arrange a spiritual array this quickly. Heart array state. Principal Xiao and the others trembled. Naturally, they have heard about this state before. They heard that even rank 3 spiritual array masters might not be able to enter that mysterious state. Yet Mu Chen was actually able to enter that state with his strength of a rank 1 spiritual array master. Ordinarily speaking, a peculiar fluctuation would emerge while arranging a spiritual array. However, they never expected that Mu Chen would arrange a spiritual array. Therefore, their attention was completely focused on the exchange between the two of them. But who would have thought? Interesting. Mr. Hao smiled slightly. His eyes remained tightly fixed at the stage. A spiritual array. On the stage, Lu Mubai's figure had completely stopped. He had an extremely pale expression as he stared at the circulating fiery red spiritual array behind Mu Chen. The violent spiritual energy emitted out from that location had caused the air to constantly tremble. Mu Chen looked at the pale Lu Mubai and gently smiled as he exhaled slowly. He actually carried a mentality of hoping to be lucky as he arranged a spiritual array in combat. After all, this was extremely difficult to do. Although he had constantly attempted to understand the mysterious heart array state during this 1 month, he would still have to pay a big price if he made a mistake. But fortunately, he won this bet. The experience from the spiritual road had allowed him to gather his thoughts and focus completely. During the critical moments, he would not be distracted and remain calm like the water as he entered the mysterious heart array state. By borrowing its power, he had successfully arranged a spiritual array. Try out this feast that I've prepared for you. Mu Chen directed a smile towards Lu Mubai and his eyes immediately turned sharp. His hand seals changed as he shouted out. Devouring Tiger Blaze Spiritual Array. Roar. Following Mu Chen's shout, a deep tiger's roar actually emitted out from the fiery red spiritual array behind him as it shone. This devouring tiger blaze spiritual art was a diagram array that Mu Chen had obtained from Wenling the night before he returned to the Northern Spiritual Academy a month ago. The power of this spiritual array was quite extraordinary. It required a total of 17 spiritual seals in order to arrange it. A month ago, Mu Chen did not have the ability to condense 17 spiritual seals. However, after a month of harsh training, he had finally succeeded. The power of this spiritual array was ranked in the top 3 amongst all the spiritual arrays that Wenling knew. Once it was released, even a spiritual rotation stage late phase would have to avoid its brilliance and power. Lu Mubai stared at the spiritual array filled with a violent spiritual energy. His hands slowly clenched together and coldness surged through his eyes. Roar. The fiery red spiritual array had become increasingly violent. In the next instant, a fiery red light swept out like lava and directly formed into a mighty flame tiger. Swish. The instant that this flame tiger had appeared, it shouted to the sky. With a burning flame and violent spiritual energy, it crossed through the skies and lunged towards Lu Mubai under many gazes. This attack was something that a spiritual rotation stage late phase individual would be afraid of. The flame tiger roared and heated winds blew. It seemed that the air was completely oppressed and fled away as it enshrouded Lu Mubai. Lu Mubai lifted his head and stared at the rapidly approaching flame figure. His face suddenly became extremely cold. You think you can win with such a technique? He muttered to himself. However, he did not move too much. The fiery red spiritual energy gushed out like fire as the flame tiger charged towards him. Ah! Within the northern spiritual square, everybody watched as Lu Mubai clashed together with the flame tiger. They exclaimed out loud. Did this guy abandon himself to despair? In the seats at front, Lu Qingtian smiled sarcastically when he saw this. Mu Chen also watched tightly at the location where the flames were raging. However, he frowned. In the next instant, he seemed to have felt something and quickly retreated backwards. Boom! A powerful spiritual energy fluctuation erupted out from within the center of the flames. The powerful spiritual energy actually forcibly scattered the raging flames away. What a powerful spiritual energy! This sudden turn of events stunned everybody. They hurriedly looked over and saw a figure wrapped with dense spiritual energy slowly walking out from within the flames. Lu Mubai's spiritual energy is actually even more powerful than an ordinary spiritual rotation stage late phase. A few individuals sensed the dense spiritual energy surging out from the figure's body and could not help but shout out loudly. So this Lu Mubai also had a hidden card up his sleeves. Su Ling, Tang Qianer and the others turned slightly pale as they watched this scene. Spiritual rotation stage late phase. This Lu Mubai was truly a person who concealed himself completely. Mu Chen. You're not the only one that holds a hidden card. Dense spiritual energy enshrouded Lu Mubai. He felt the powerful spiritual energy within his body as his viper-like eyes locked itself onto Mu Chen and he laughed. Mu Chen also stared at Lu Mubai. This guy really made a breakthrough during this 1 month and reached the spiritual rotation stage late phase. However, did you believe that a spiritual rotation stage late phase was the limits of my power? Lu Mubai smiled gently and had a cold smile. The eyes he used to look at Mu Chen became extremely mocking. I'll show you what is called an insurmountable gap. Although I haven't used it for a long time, did you all forget that I possess a spiritual pulse as well? Lu Mubai slowly spread out his hands. Afterwards, everybody was able to see lights slowly emerging on his body. These lights were like a soaring dragon as it flashed. With the emergence of these lights, Lu Mubai's spiritual rotation stage late phase's spiritual energy fluctuation actually began to expand once again. Finally, under many astonished gazes, he had reached the pinnacle of a spiritual rotation stage late phase. At this moment, he had reached the limits of a spiritual rotation stage. Just who, among the spiritual rotation stage, could compete with him? The entire venue was completely silent. The only thing happening was Lu Mubai's dense spiritual energy spreading out in waves. The pressure from this spiritual energy even made the people near the stage feel a sense of pressure. Not only did Lu Mubai advance to the spiritual rotation stage, he even possesses a human-level spiritual pulse. It will be troubling now. Tang Shan sighed. There are probably only a few people who could compete with Lu Mubai within the spiritual rotation stage. Mu Feng's face sank. The boy from the Lu family wasn't that simple. He never expected that the rank 1 spiritual array that Mu Chen had arranged would be completely useless in front of him. I won't give you a chance to struggle. On the stage, Lu Mubai stared coldly at Mu Chen. His hands slowly clenched together and forceful waves of spiritual energy quickly gathered at the center of his palm. In the end, a dazzling sun seemed to emerge at the center of Lu Mubai's palm. Sensing the powerful spiritual energy at the center of Lu Mubai's palm, many people's hearts jumped. Is he planning to defeat Mu Chen ruthlessly? Solar Inferno Palm. Lu Mubai's body rushed into the air and his spiritual energy poured out endlessly. His entire body seemed to have turned into a fiery light while a fiery sun was tightly clutched at the center of his palm. It carried an extraordinary fluctuation as he charged furiously at Mu Chen, who was below him. The ground on the stage collapsed slightly due to the violent impact. Everybody watched flabbergasted at Lu Mubai's amazing offensive. Within the spiritual rotation stage, is there really someone who could block it? The outcome will be decided like this. Phew. Under numerous gazes, Mu Chen also took a deep breath. Then, he actually slowly closed his eyes once again. His heart was calm like the water and his great pagoda art began to furiously circulate. Within his aura sea, the spiritual energy will began to emit numerous lights. These lights gathered above it and a vague black light tower with 9 levels slowly emerged. When this black light tower appeared, mysterious black lights began to slowly lit up within the depths of his body. At the same time, a vague black light tower appeared on the surface of Mu Chen's body. He suddenly opened his eyes and watched with razor sharp eyes at the sun descending down from the sky. You have a spiritual pulse. I also have one. Furthermore, mine is much more powerful than yours. Chapter 86 Victory or Defeat. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 86 Victory or Defeat. A fiery spiritual energy swept down violently from the sky. A dazzling sun emitted a powerful spiritual energy as it bombarded down like a meteorite towards the boy at the center of the stage. At this moment, dark black spiritual energy surged out from Mu Chen's body. Black lights emerged on the surface of his body and formed a blurry black light tower. Black lights spilled out from the light tower as it guarded Mu Chen's body. A rather mysterious fluctuation emitted out from it. When a black light tower suddenly emerged on the surface of Mu Chen's body, it also attracted a lot of attention. At that moment, many individuals had surprised expressions. As Mu Chen had brought surprise to them earlier when he arranged a spiritual energy, they did not dare to underestimate this boy. Mu Feng was startled slightly when he saw the black light tower. Then, he immediately recalled something and his eyes instantly narrowed. He clenched the chair's support with his hands while his heart was completely in a chaos. Although the black light tower was quite blurry, he had a deep impression of it. This was because Mu Chen's mother had used a similar measure before. However, the black light tower formed by her was many times stronger compared to the one formed by Mu Chen. Did Mu Chen's great pagoda art improve again? Mu Feng's eyes twinkled. Surprise surged out from the depths of his eyes. That brat was truly unpredictable. The great pagoda art that had once troubled him was flowing smoothly within Mu Chen's hand. This is. On the main platform, Teacher Mo was shocked as he stared at the black light tower on the surface of Mu Chen's body. The black light tower exuded a mysterious fluctuation. Although it appeared to be insignificant, nobody dared to underestimate it. Teacher Mo looked at the boy's figure and could not help but click his tongue. This boy really hid many cards up his sleeves. Swish. Just when ideas were appearing within everybody's hearts, the atmosphere within the stage had completely heated up. In the air, Lu Mubai witnessed the commotion caused by Mu Chen. However, the sneer on his face became increasingly rich. Right now, he had advanced to the spiritual rotation stage. Moreover, with the power of the spiritual pulse, there were few that could compete with him among the spiritual rotation stage. No matter what the current Mu Chen would do, it was nothing but a last-ditch effort. There would only be one outcome for him. That is to be stepped by him on the stage. You're not qualified to snatch the seated entry away from me. A cold light flashed through Lu Mubai's eyes. The fiery sun within the center of his palm swelled once again. It was evident that he was planning to use all his strength in this one attack to end this fight. Boom! A powerful spiritual energy pressure enveloped down from the sky. Mu Chen slowly raised his head and stared at the burning sun that was quickly descending down with his black eyes. He immediately bent his knees slightly as his eyes twinkled coldly. Boom! Mu Chen's body charged out as a dark black spiritual energy erupted out from within his body. A mysterious light pattern seemed to emerge above the black light tower. Outside of the stage, the countless individuals exclaimed loudly when they noticed Mu Chen actually taking the initiative to attack. They did not dare to blink as they watched the scene. The black and red lights flashed as they charged out like light beams. In the next instant, it collided fiercely against each other under the numerous gazes. Boom! A shocking sound rang out from midair. The black and red lights bloomed in the sky like fireworks. Crunch! The fiery red spiritual energy that formed a sun had fiercely smashed against the black light tower and a crunching sound rang out. At the same time, Mu Chen's eyes peeked through the black light tower and stared tightly at the hideous-looking Lu Mubai. Break! Lu Mubai issued out a deep roar from his throat. His veins on his arms trembled as he pushed the spiritual energy within his body to the limits. He instilled spiritual energy crazily into the center of his palm. The collision between the two of them did not go as he expected. He thought that the light tower would crumple instantly. However, the black light tower that enveloped Mu Chen's body had a powerful defensive power even when it seemed quite fragile. It actually withstood his fierce attack. This was not the result he wanted. You're only a spiritual rotation stage initial phase, what gives you the right to fight against me? Lu Mubai clenched his teeth tightly and retracted his arm. Then, he fiercely smashed forward. The burning sun continuously bombarded the thin black light tower. Deep sound spread out through the entire northern spiritual square. Buzz. The black light tower began to ripple under the crazy bombardment by Lu Mubai. Even Mu Chen, who was protected inside, was subjected to the vibrations and blood flowed out from his mouth. Mu Chen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and his eyes became cold. He furiously circulated the spiritual energy within his body. The spiritual energy wheel within his aura C became increasingly brighter as he released all his spiritual energy unreservedly. At the same time, the mini-dot-sized black light tower above the spiritual energy wheel also let out subtle buzzing sounds. This sound seemed to reveal traces of human pride. It was the feeling of being provoked by something mediocre. Swoosh! The mysterious black lights within the depths of Mu Chen's body became increasingly dazzling. It has an arrogance that belongs to itself. A trashy spiritual pulse actually dares to challenge its command. Above Mu Chen's body, the black lights from the thin black light tower suddenly erupted out. A long humming sound rang out and the black lights that expanded out instantly covered the violent red sun. As this occurred, a roar emitted out from Mu Chen's mouth. He moved his feet and his body suddenly spun at a high speed. The black light tower that enshrouded his body had turned into a light spiral at this moment. Swish! As the black light tower rotated, the top part of the tower smashed fiercely into the burning sun. Then, Lu Mubai was horrified to see cracks appearing on the burning sun that combined all his spiritual energy. Moreover, he was astonished when he felt a strange fluctuation passing over from the light tower. Under this fluctuation, the spiritual pulse within his body was actually suppressed. How is that possible? The spiritual pulse that was shining within his body had suddenly dimmed a little bit. Lu Mubai's face instantly changed. Break! However, when he was still astonished, a cold cry rang out from within the black light tower. The fiery sun instantly began to collapse and completely shattered apart. Moreover, the black light tower also crumbled and became like an illusion while the fiery sun shattered. Swish! A black figure charged out swiftly from the illusory light tower and fist filled with black lights fired out. On the fist, two black light seals emerged. When the fiery sun shattered, Lu Mubai turned pale. The spiritual energy within his body had quickly vanished. He hurriedly crossed his arms in order to protect his body against the black fist that fiercely smashed over. Boom! The fists wrapped with the two black light seals landed on Lu Mubai's arm. A domineering and matchless energy exploded out like a flood. Poochie! Lu Mubai felt a stinging pain emerging from within his arms. He could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood and his body flew back awkwardly. However, the instant he was sent flying away. His leg also fiercely kicked Mu Chen's body. Dong! The two figures descended down from the air and landed severely on the ground. It created two holes on the stage as they spat out a mouthful of blood. Wah! A commotion rang out once again from outside the stage. They never expected both of them to fight to the point where they were both hurt. Mu Chen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth as he stood up unsteadily. He stared coldly at Lu Mubai, who was not far away. Although he felt immense pain, he ignored it completely and charged forward. He stuck up two fingers and a golden light flashed dimly at his fingertips. Since the two of them have fought to this extent, they had almost completely depleted the spiritual energy within their bodies. Right now, it was a competition of whose willpower was stronger. Mu Chen charged directly at Lu Mubai. His face was expressionless, yet it gave off a sharp killing intent. From this killing intent, nobody doubted that he was really going to kill Lu Mubai. Seeing Mu Chen charged recklessly over to him, Lu Mubai's face became even paler. He stood up awkwardly and retreated 2 steps. The spiritual energy within his body was already completely depleted and there was no way of him attacking anymore. From this scene, the outcome was already quite obvious. However, since Lu Mubai refused to admit defeat, the competition was not considered over. Mu Chen's body charged towards Lu Mubai. But just when his fingers were about to stab into the latter's throat, Lu Qingtian's face finally turned dark and he shouted out. "Asshole, you dare!" As he cried out loudly, he actually charged out and an immense spiritual energy fluctuation filled the entire venue. "Lu Qingtian, you dare touch my son!" Mu Feng also shouted out furiously and his palm smashed against the armrest. His body also rushed over and appeared directly above Mu Chen. Then, he smacked Lu Qingtian in anger. Bang! As the 2 spirit stage late phase powerhouses fought fiercely in midair, the spiritual energy shock wave made Mu Chen and Lu Mubai fly backwards. Both of them immediately spat out a mouthful of blood. "Lu Qingtian, Mu Feng, what are you 2 doing?" Seeing both of them fight, Principal Xiao also shouted out in anger. His body moved and appeared between the 2 of them while stopping both of them. As they noticed Principal intervening in this, Lu Qingtian and Mu Feng stopped as well. They glared fiercely at each other. That Mu Chen is too ruthless. It was evident that he was going to take Lu Mubai's life. Acting this ruthless in a duel, we must cancel his qualifications. Lu Qingtian gnashed his teeth and said. "Stop with your bullsh****. You lost the battle, yet you don't want to lose the war. Just how shameless is your Lu territory?" Mu Feng said mockingly. "Both of you, if you both disturb the competition again, then don't blame the Northern Spiritual Academy for not giving face to you 2. Principal Xiao shouted in anger. Lu Qingtian gritted his teeth and lowered his voice and asked. "Then, who is the final victor of this match? Seeing that both of them are completely exhausted, why don't we consider this as a draw?" Hush! When these words were said, hushing sounds instantly rang out from outside the stage. If it wasn't for Lu Qingtian earlier, Mu Chen would have probably obtained the victory. Principal Xiao also frowned and said. "That will be determined by Mr. Hao." After he said this, he turned towards Mr. Hao, who was on the main platform, and cupped his hands as he asked. "Mr. Hao, in your opinion, what's the outcome of this match?" Hearing this, Mr. Hao said with a faint smile. "Mu Chen wins." "Why?" Lu Qingtian shouted out furiously. "Can't you see?" Mr. Hao pointed at the stage and said. "Mu Chen is still on the stage while Lu Mubai was sent out. Therefore, he lost." When Lu Qingtian heard this, he hurriedly looked down and his face turned dark. The shock wave caused by Mu Feng and him when they fought had actually sent Lu Mubai out of the stage. Although Mu Chen was lying down far away, he was still at the edge of the stage and did not drop out. Sounds of suppressed laughter rang out from outside the stage. Lu Qingtian really shot himself in the foot. Originally, he could still argue about the situation. However, in the end, he sent his son directly off the stage. This way, there was no hope on arguing about it. Mr. Hao slowly stood up and looked at the audience. His faint voice resounded through the sky. "Right now, I declare that the Northern Spiritual Academy's seeded entry belongs to the East Branch's Mu Chen." At the Northern Spiritual Academy's East Branch, Su Ling, Tang Qianer and the others were stunned. Then, thunderous cheers resounded out instantly. At the same time, countless individuals stood up outside of the stage and a loud applause rang out. The earlier battle was magnificent. The strongest student within the Northern Spiritual Academy was well deserved. Amongst the thunderous cheers, Mu Chen struggled to sit up. He had a pale expression and lifted his head to look at Mu Feng. Then, he noticed the latter giving a thumbs up to him and immediately smiled. What belongs to me will ultimately belong to me. Nobody can take it away. Chapter 87 Selecting the Spiritual Academies. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Chapter 87, Selecting the Spiritual Academies. The much-anticipated entry competition closed the curtains with Mu Chen obtaining the most valuable seeded entry. However, everybody within the Northern Spiritual Square was still immersed in the fierce battle earlier. Many people were amazed by that fight. With his spiritual rotation stage late phase strength and the power of his spiritual pulse, Lu Mubai was almost regarded as having no opponents beneath the spirit stage. However, who would have expected that he would ultimately be defeated by Mu Chen, who was only a spiritual rotation stage initial phase? This result made everybody secretly sigh. No wonder Mu Chen was able to become the only one qualified for the spiritual road within the Northern Spiritual Realm. Although Lu Qingtian was extremely dissatisfied with the final judgment made by Mr. Hao, he was not stupid. The latter's background was extremely powerful and he would not care about his identity of the Lu territory's territory lord. Since that he lost the seeded entry, he could only think of another approach. After resting for a while, Mu Chen and Lu Mubai gradually recovered a bit of strength. However, Lu Mubai had an extremely cold and ugly expression. Under numerous gazes, Mr. Hao looked across the stage and waved his hand. Then, the 12 people that participated for the entry competition hurried onto the stage as they were stared enviously. The final results have come out for the entry competition today. Mr. Hao's eyes fixed themselves at Mu Chen and the others as he faintly said. Originally, there should be only 6 entries including the seeded entry. However, there is a slight change right now. Afterwards, Mr. Hao turned his gaze towards Mo Ling, who was sweating nervously, and said. You have lost the competition originally. Based on the rules, you should be disqualified. Mo Ling's eyes turned dark and revealed a bitter expression. However, your perseverance and courage is commendable. Your talent is also acceptance. Thus, I will make an exception and give you an entry this time. Mr. Hao said. Mo Ling was stunned. His face immediately turned red with excitement and hurriedly bowed down as he said. Thank you, Mr. Mr. Hao nodded. Then, he turned around to look at Tang Qianair and Hong Ling. The two of you drew. Normally speaking, this should not have happened. However, I can look aside and hand both of you an entry. Tang Qianair and Hong Ling were instantly filled with joy when they heard this. However, there is a condition. Mr. Hao said. What's the condition? Tang Qianair and Hong Ling quickly asked. You can only choose to enter the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy 1. Mr. Hao said with a faint smile. The Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy. Tang Qianair and Hong Ling were stunned. The 5 Great Academies. Accurately speaking, it is the title for 5 spiritual academies. These 5 spiritual academies are known respectively as Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, Azure Sky Spiritual Academy, Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy, Martial Spiritual Academy and the Saint Spiritual Academy. Amongst them, the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy was rather unique as they only recruit female students. Naturally, you should not underestimate the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy due to this. To be able to become one of the 5 great academies with just females, the strength of the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy was absolutely terrifying to the point where it was utterly indescribable. Moreover, the name of the 5 great academies actually had some sort of origin. It was said that each of the 5 great academies had an ancient divine beast living there that had once shocked the world. In fact, the name of the 5 great academies are actually derived from the name of the 5 ancient divine beasts. So what's your decision? Mr. Hao looked at Tang Qianair and Hong Ling. To be honest, there were indeed much less female students compared to male students during the recruitment process. As the recruiter for the 5 Great Academies, he would fail his job if he didn't find enough people for the Million Phoenix Academy. Although the people within the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy were all females, it was precisely because of this that it was extremely tough and troublesome. Hong Ling did not hesitate at all and directly nodded her head. To be able to enter the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy was just as she had wished. Although the other 4 spiritual academies were not terrible compared to the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy, the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy was still the one that suited her the most. Tang Qian'er hesitated for a moment. She peeked and glanced at Mu Chen. If that's the case, wouldn't she be in a different spiritual academy than Mu Chen? However, if she did not accept, would she have another choice? As if he was aware of Tang Qian'er's gaze, Mu Chen nodded at her. The Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy was actually quite suitable for Tang Qian'er. It would be irrational if she failed to enter it. Seeing Mu Chen nod his head, Tang Qian'er bit her red lips and bitterness filled her eyes. Then, she tilted her head and said to Mr. Hao, "I'll select the Million Phoenix Spiritual Academy as well." When that happened, Mr. Hao smiled. Afterwards, he turned to look at Lu Mubai and the others and asked, "Your decisions are?" "I'll choose the Azure Sky Spiritual Academy." Chen Fan and Hui Yun exchanged glances and actually selected the same spiritual academy. "I'll choose the Saint Spiritual Academy." Lu Mubai pondered for a moment and said without any hesitation. He had considered about it a long time ago. Although the strength of the 5 Great Academies was absolutely terrifying, he still discovered that the Saint Spiritual Academy was considered the leader amongst the 5 Great Academies if you really had to rank them. It was said that the Saint Spiritual Academy was always the strongest in the competitions shared between the 5 Great Academies during the past few years. Mr. Hao glanced at Lu Mubai and nodded without saying anything. Then, he turned his attention towards Mu Chen and said, "What about you?" Everybody nearby immediately set their sights towards Mu Chen. As the one who obtained the seated entry, no matter which spiritual academy he entered, he should be able to obtain far more resources and status compared to an ordinary student. Lu Mubai stared hatefully at Mu Chen and his eyes revealed that he was extremely unwilling. That was what he was supposed to enjoy. Mu Chen pouted his lips for a moment. A transparent, glass-dot-like pair of beautiful eyes and silver long hair flashed through his mind. As he thought about this, he slowly clenched his hands. "Mr. Hao, may I ask you for some information?" Mu Chen took a deep breath and respectfully asked Mr. Hao. Mr. Hao smiled and nodded his head. He felt quite satisfied with Mu Chen. "I want to ask about 2 people." Mu Chen said in a soft voice. "Mr. Hao, you should have heard of the name, Ji Xian, right?" When Mu Chen said this name out, Mr. Hao's eyes narrowed. His face also became serious and he stared deeply at Mu Chen as he spoke. Ji Xian. In the Spiritual Roads trial, he was a person that was assessed as a king class. He was one of the most dazzling individuals within the Spiritual Road and obtained a core entry for the 5 Great Academies. Everybody's expression changed when they heard these words. Although they were unfamiliar with that name, they could feel an intense pressure. A core entry. It was something that could only be obtained by a person who was like a monster. King class huh? Mu Chen's eyes drooped slightly. This was the highest class of assessment within the spiritual road. However, it was within his expectations that Ji Xian would obtain this assessment with his abilities. Which spiritual academy did he enter? Mu Chen's voice remained calm. Nobody could tell what sort of emotions were within his voice. Mr. Hao stared at Mu Chen. Shortly after, he said. Ji Xian entered the Saint Spiritual Academy and was even specially named out by the higher-ups of the Saint Spiritual Academy. The Saint Spiritual Academy. Mu Chen glanced at Lu Mubai. Then, he nodded his head slightly before he hesitated for a moment. His originally sharp and cold gaze suddenly turned gentle. The second person I would like to ask is called Luo Li. Mu Chen scratched his head and asked. Luo Li. Mr. Hao frowned and said faintly. Luo Li. She was also assessed as a king class within the Spiritual Roads trial. She also obtained a core entry for the 5 great academies. Everybody at the scene secretly clucked their tongues. What sort of insane individuals are within the spiritual road? She's also a king class. Mu Chen smiled. If it's her, she definitely had the ability. It seems that she became a lot more powerful after he had left the spiritual road. Then which spiritual academy did she enter? Mu Chen looked at Mr. Hao nervously. He had made a promise with her. If it deviated from it, she would probably put on a terrible face when they met again with her personality. Though she would always have an indifferent expression. Luo Li entered the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Mr. Hao stared at Mu Chen with a smile that didn't seem like a smile. Then he said. Originally, the Martial Spiritual Academy's Lord Principal had personally spoken with her and wanted to let her enter the Martial Spiritual Academy. But in the end, she rejected and instead chose the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. At the side, Chen Fan and the others were completely flabbergasted. Isn't that simply too arrogant? Hearing this, Mu Chen was also stunned. He had an exceptionally complex expression on his face. The Spiritual Road. As the cold night enveloped the lands, a warm bonfire rose up within the depths of a forest. Beside the bonfire, a boy was fiddling with the fire and caused the warm flames to float towards the right. At that location, a girl with black clothes was sitting there quietly. Her delicate face was buried within her knees and she only revealed a pair of glass-like eyes. She stared at the handsome face of the black-haired boy in front of her as she was warmed by the flames. Her eyes curved gently like a crescent moon. However, the curvature was minimal and was impossible to detect. You. She suddenly extended her slender white hands over and pulled out a wood unconsciously. She casually asked. After the spiritual road is over, which spiritual academy would you enter? Me. The boy thought for a moment. He smiled and said. I'll probably go to the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. I was born in the Northern Spiritual Realm, so I have a good feeling with the word North. The girl glanced at him. Her voice was flat, like the sounds of the valley, and she said. The Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. I don't want to go there. It seems that we'll have to separate after the spiritual road is over. The boy was stunned. He helplessly asked. Then which spiritual academy are you planning to go to? Tell me, when the time comes, I'll go to that one as well. The girl tilted her head and asked. Why should I tell you? Didn't you say that you'll help block all the arrows behind my back? You can't say something when you didn't mean it. You didn't have this attitude when you first formed a team with me. The boy said furiously. No. If I'm with you, it will bother my training. You should just go to your Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. I won't choose that place. The girl gently let out an humph sound. She did not wait for the boy to become angry and directly extinguished the fire with a wave of her hand. Then, she jumped onto a tree and said. I'm going to sleep. It's your turn to guard during the night today. Luo Li, you didn't keep your promise. Don't act that you're amazing because you're pretty. Tell me clearly. Beneath the tree, an angry voice rang out endlessly from the boy. Above the tree, the girl gently leaned on the tree branch and gently lifted the corner of her mouth under the faint moonlight. At that instant, her charm even made the moonlight dimmer. Idiot. She gently smiled within her heart. Then, she slowly closed her eyes and fell asleep peacefully. Mu Chen exhaled heavily. Then, he looked towards Mr. Hao in front of him and said with a slight smile. Mr. Hao, I'll select the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Chapter 88. Conclusion. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Mr. Hao smiled at Mu Chen and his eyes showed a meaning as if he understood. He soon nodded his head and said, "That's fine. It's up to you." It seems that Mu Chen decided to go to the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy because he shared a relationship with Luo Li. However, this was not within the scope of his consideration. With Luo Li's strength and talent, she would definitely be dazzling even if she entered the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. As for Mu Chen, he was quite excellent as well. However, he lacked the final part of the spiritual road and temporarily had a bit of a gap compared to the monsters that had successfully completed the spiritual road's trial. However, Mr. Hao knew that this gap would soon be covered by the boy in front of him. He knew that if it wasn't for that sudden turn of events, Mu Chen's final assessment within the spiritual road would perhaps reach the King class as well. This was enough to prove his talent. How about the two of you? Mr. Hao looked at Mo Ling and a West Branch student, who haven't decided on their spiritual academy yet. I'll go to the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy as well. Mo Ling scratched his head and said in an embarrassed way. In his eyes, the 5 great academies were a mysterious and massive existence. Due to the trust he had in Mu Chen, he felt that it may be better if he was beside Mu Chen. I'll go to the Martial Spiritual Academy. The West Branch student also quickly replied. Mr. Hao nodded. This way, the entries from the Northern Spiritual Academy were completely clear now. There would be 2 individuals going to the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, 2 for the Azure Sky Spiritual Academy, 2 for the Myriad Phoenix Academy, 1 for the Martial Spiritual Academy and 1 for the Saint Spiritual Academy. You still have 2 months of preparation time. After 2 months, you will come to the Northern Spiritual Academy once again and I'll send you to the place prior to the 5 great academies. Over there, you will meet the new students from all over the world. Moreover, there will be a trial waiting for you at that location. If you perform poorly during the trial, there is a danger of being deprived of your entry. Thus, you should train well during these 2 months. Mr. Hao said faintly. Chen Fan and the others suddenly cried out loud when they heard this. The 5 great academies weren't really that easy to enter. Isn't it too harsh with all these tests? When he heard this, Mu Chen's heart shook. If that's the case, wouldn't he be able to meet Luo Li at that place? Okay. The entry competition today is over now. For the remaining time, you can manage it by yourself. It is fine even if you take a temporary leave from the Northern Spiritual Academy. However, you must remember to come back after 2 months. Mr. Hao waved his hand and leisurely left. With Mr. Hao's departure, Chen Fan and the others were relieved. Lu Mubai glanced coldly at Mu Chen before heading out directly. Even Chen Fan and the others could feel the rage within Lu Mubai clearly. TCH, he can't even admit that he lost. Chen Fan pouted his lips and said towards the back of Lu Mubai. Mu Chen. It seems that we'll be separated in the future. Haha. However, I will train hard within the Azure Sky Spiritual Academy. Moreover, I remember that the competitions within the 5 great academies are quite fierce. You must be careful, otherwise, I might have surpassed you by the time we meet again. Chen Fan laughed. Mu Chen also smiled. The 5 great academies weren't a tiny place like the Northern Spiritual Academy. It is a place that gathers all sort of talented individuals from all over the world. If they wanted to shine at that location, it wasn't an easy thing to do. Because they managed to obtain an entry, Chen Fan and the others were extremely excited. After they spoke a few words with Mu Chen, they headed off towards their friend. Afterwards, only 2 beautiful girls remained beside Mu Chen as they stared at him. Congratulations. Hong Ling stared complicatedly at Mu Chen. It was evident that Mu Chen was the one in the limelight today. Nobody could have imagined that someone as strong as Lu Mubai would actually be defeated by him. The ordinary boy in her memories back then had become someone bright and dazzling. I'll also have to congratulate Senior Hong Ling. Mu Qin gave a smile to Hong Ling. Then, he saw the resentful face of Tang Qianair beside him. He could not help but chuckle. Sister Qianair. This is a happy event, why do you have such an expression? Are you really that glad that you'll separate from me? Tang Qianair pouted and said. Mu Qin could only helplessly smile. It seems that it was wise to shut up. Are you close with that Luo Li? Tang Qianair said in a bitter tone. Naturally, she saw the different expression Mu Chen had when he said that name. She's a friend that I met within the spiritual road. She's beautiful like Sister Qianair. Mu Chen smiled and said. Tang Qianair's face turned red and she said. Enough with your sweet talk, I'll go and work hard within the Myriad Phoenix Spiritual Academy. In case we meet again, I'll represent the Myriad Phoenix Spiritual Academy to defeat a person like you from the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. When that happens, I must ask Sister Qianair to hold back for old time's sake. Mu Chen nodded and seriously said as he smiled. Puchi. When Tang Qianair saw Mu Chen acting this way, she could not help but chuckle. The girl's bell-like laughter sound made Mu Chen's tired boy to slowly relax. After the gloomy Lu Mubai reunited with Lu Qingtian, they did not remain long at this location and instead stormed away with a dark expression. However, they glanced coldly at Mu Feng and Mu Chen as they left. Dad, what should we do now? Upon exiting the Northern Spiritual Square, Lu Mubai finally could not resist and asked. He could not accept this. After all, he had prepared himself so well for the seated entry, yet he failed in the end. With a cold expression, Lu Qingtian said. Since that Mu Chen obtained the seated entry, he will definitely be valued highly after he enters the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. Moreover, with his talent, his achievements would not be low in the future. Therefore, it is considered a great potential threat for us. Then, Lu Mubai had to admit it. Mu Chen was indeed quite dangerous. What are you afraid of? Even though he has a seated entry, what use is it if he could not enter the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy? Savageness passed through Lu Qingtian's expression. As long as we decimate the Mu territory, Mu Feng and Mu Chen would definitely die. Although Mu Chen had already obtained the entry, a battle between the Lu territory and the Mu territory is a dispute between forces within the Northern Spiritual Realm. Even the 5 great academies cannot say anything regarding this matter. Moreover, if we accidentally kill a rascal during this battle, who could say anything about it? Lu Mubai's eyes jumped. His eyes were filled with ominous color. Then, when should we attack? There's no need to be that impatient. Isn't there still 2 months? Lu Qingtian's eyes narrowed as he sneered. Your grandpa is about to finish his training. As long as he is able to advance into the 3 heaven stage, the Mu territory will become a weakling that we could easily crush. Right now, we have to find something for the Mu territory to do. This way, we could avoid letting them know this information. If they were to arrange it so that Mu Chen could escape when it happens, it would be a great disaster for us. Lu Mubai nodded heavily. For things like this, you either should not do it or otherwise, once you've done it, you must eradicate the problem completely. You must not leave the slightest chance of an impending future disaster. Lu Qingtian said coldly and turned around to look back at the massive Northern Spiritual Square. Then, he waved his sleeves and walked away. Mu Feng. You and your son should just wait for your death. After the entry competition ended, Mu Chen remained at the Northern Spiritual Academy for a day before he returned back to the Mu territory with Mu Feng. When they returned, the entire Mu city was decorated with lights. The atmosphere was filled with joy. As the little lord of the Mu territory, Mu Chen had obtained the seated entry for the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy. This was considered an extremely great news for the Mu territory. Haha, little Mu is amazing. This time, the Mu territory really obtained a great deal of fame. It's the first seeded entry within the northern spiritual realm. Zhou Yi led the crowd and headed forward. The stern expression that he always had was currently filled with delight. After hearing Zhou Ye's praise, Mu Chen also scratched his head. Enough. I've heard enough of these words during the past 2 days. Mu Feng smiled and waved his hand. His face suddenly turned slightly serious as he said. During this period of time, increase the alertness a bit. Since the Lu territory lost the seeded entry this time, with his personality, Lu Qingtian would probably not let it go so easily. When Zhou Yi heard this, he also nodded and quickly sent down a command. After returning to the Mu estate, Mu Chen participated in the celebratory feast for a moment before heading back to his room. He sat cross-legged on his bed and stretched his waist. It had been quite tiring for him during the past few weeks. I should be able to see her after 2 months, right? I wonder if she changed since I haven't met her for so long. Mu Chen muttered to himself. At this moment, his handsome face seemed extremely gentle. With Luo Li's talent and her rating within the spiritual road, she would be valued highly no matter which spiritual academy she entered. However, nobody knew the reason why she chose the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy aside from him. She completed the spiritual road's trial. Right now, she's probably far stronger than me. Mu Chen sat up fiercely. This was not allowed. If he had fallen behind her too much, it would be too disgraceful. Moreover, she was so beautiful. There must be a variety of excellent individuals who coveted her. Regarding about this matter, he had seen enough of it during the spiritual road. In the spiritual road, he was able to protect her. However, the situation was different right now. Thus, he could not feel satisfied just on this tiny bit of achievement. Mu Chen took a deep breath and began to focus as he suppressed the stress within his body. He entered a cultivation state and began absorbing the spiritual aura within the world as he circulated the great pagoda art. Mu Chen's consciousness entered his body. After a while, he seemed to have suddenly recalled something and allowed his consciousness to enter his aura sea in order to look at a certain location within it. At that location, a mysterious page of black paper was quietly floating. Above the black paper, a mysterious dark purple mandala flower extended out and formed a beautiful cage. In the center of the cage, there was a 9 netherbird, who had restrained the flames on its black wings. Mu Chen's consciousness stared at the 9 netherbird. He hesitated for a moment before sending extremely gentle thoughts into the cage. Boom! Just when Mu Chen's gentle thoughts entered, the 9 netherbird suddenly opened her eyes fiercely. Fierceness instantly filled its eyes and it viciously stared at Mu Chen. Boom! It crashed onto the light barrier formed by the cage and caused a chain reaction of ripples. Her vicious eyes seemed that it wanted to swallow Mu Chen up completely. Mu Chen was shocked by the vicious aura coming from the 9 netherbird. However, he could not trap it here forever. It was an unstable bomb. Moreover, it was a bomb that was hidden within his body. If it exploded one day, Mu Chen would probably be blown to the extent where not even his bones would remain. Therefore, he must find a solution to this problem. Regarding the solution, Mu Chen had thought with much deliberation and felt that he should use the method of negotiations. However, only God would know whether or not it would be effective. But no matter what, he must attempt it. Chapter 89. Failed Negotiations. You are listening at NovelFull.audio. Mu Chen's consciousness stared at the 9 netherbird, which was trapped within a cage. The latter also stared at him fiercely with a vicious gaze. From the vicious aura, Mu Chen had no doubt that the 9 netherbird would rip him into pieces if it had the chance. It was too difficult to tame a spiritual beast at its level. Cough. As he was stared at fiercely by the 9 netherbird, Mu Chen let out a dry cough. He attempted to convey friendly thoughts over. About that, hello. However, the Nine Netherbird was completely indifferent when facing his method of conveying friendliness. The vicious aura within its eyes did not show the slightest signs of weakening. I know that you can understand my words. Mu Chen said helplessly. For you to be in such a situation is actually your own fault. I did not provoke you, yet you dove into my body and attempted to erase my consciousness. The Nine Netherbird looked at Mu Chen coldly and slowly retracted its body. Its elegant wings, which were filled with black fire, instantly laid down lazily on top of the mandala flower. If we continue to be in a stalemate, it would not be beneficial to either of us. Why don't we discuss it a bit and find a method that would benefit the both of us? Mu Chen led the discussion and said. However, against his induction, the Nine Netherbird's eyes seemed to show a hint of ridicule and it simply ignored him. Oi, can't you give me a bit of face? At the very least, this is my place. Do you believe that I'll use this thing to deal with you? Seeing the Nine Netherbird ignore him, Mu Chen could not help but feel a bit angry. When the Nine Netherbird heard this, the ridicule within its eyes increased and a special thought was conveyed out as Mu Chen became angry. Despicable human, if you could control it, would you have to talk with me? So you really knew how to communicate with humans? When he was aware of these thoughts, Mu Chen's heart jumped. No matter what, the Nine Netherbird had finally communicated with him. However, during the communication, it had always looked down upon him and mocked him. You treacherous humans really know how to sweet talk. You just took a fancy to my soul essence and wanted to attempt to ingest me. What a low-quality method. The Nine Netherbird sent out cold thoughts over. Humph, you seem to have said it that way so that you're quite honorable and just. Don't you want to erase my consciousness? Moreover, it was entirely your fault. If you did not have bad thoughts, why would you be trapped inside my body? Mu Chen sneered. You think you can trap me forever? My Nine Netherbird's clan possesses the blood of the undying bird. With your strength, it is impossible for you to kill me. My strength will gradually recover, and when that happens, the first thing I'll do is to kill you. Viciousness was filled within the thoughts conveyed by the Nine Netherbird. Then, why don't you try it? We'll see who will last until the end. Mu Chen grunted. He knew that it was impossible to negotiate with the Nine Netherbird. This damn beast was too arrogant. It was simply impossible to discuss how they would mutually benefit. Mu Chen's consciousness gradually faded away and he opened his tightly closed eyes. Then, he pouted. This damn Nine Netherbird. I must think of a way to get rid of this trouble, otherwise, it will become a calamity in the future. Mu Chen secretly thought to himself. He did not understand much about the Nine Netherbird. If what it said was true, perhaps Mu Chen would be the one in trouble. Therefore, he must find a method to deal with this trouble. However, Mu Chen knew that it wasn't easy to think of a solution. The only thing right now that could restrain the Nine Netherbird was the mysterious black paper within his body. However, Mu Chen did not obtain the slightest harvest when he re-examined it later. Therefore, there was no choice aside from giving up. Perhaps his strength was not enough, so he was not able to understand the mysteries of this mysterious black paper. Thus, he could only slowly deal with the matter regarding the Nine Netherbird. In the next few days, Mu Chen did not give up hope and would occasionally head over to communicate with the Nine Netherbird when he was resting. However, the latter completely ignored his words and laid down on top of the mandala flower. Its eyes were cold and were filled with ridicule. It was as if it was watching Mu Chen speaking a monologue. After attempting several times, Mu Chen finally gave up on this naive action of his. It seems that it was not feasible to reason with the Nine Netherbird. He could only hurry and increase his strength. Once he advanced to the spirit stage, he would have the ability to ingest a spiritual beast's soul essence. At that time, he would be able to cause a threat to this Nine Netherbird. When that happens, that damned feathery beast would look him directly in the eye. After he temporarily gave up on the matter regarding the 9 Netherbird, Mu Chen spent 2 days with Mr. Wenling. Based on Mu Feng's information, it seems that Mr. Wenling was about to advance to a rank 2 spiritual array master soon. If he succeeds, it would definitely be excellent news to the Mu territory. After all, there weren't more than 5 individuals that had reached the rank 2 spiritual array master within the entire northern spiritual realm. The past Mu territory never had a spiritual array master at this level. Therefore, once Mr. Wenling succeeds, it would be of great help to the reputation of the Mu territory. As for Mr. Wenling, who would always have a solemn and dull expression, he had become considerably gentle towards Mu Chen. Apparently, he had heard that Mu Chen had used a spiritual array to deal with Lu Mubai during the entry competition. This act had made Wenling feel quite honored. Within the quiet courtyard, sounds of footsteps suddenly emerged. Mr. Wenling, who was training with his eyes closed, opened his eyes and let out a faint smile. Everybody within the Mu estate knew that he did not like being disturbed. Therefore, nobody would come over to his place at this time aside from Mu Chen. He, Mr. Wen. I've come over to see when you'll make a breakthrough. As expected, Mu Chen's figure appeared in the doorway of the courtyard. The boy directed a smile towards him and greeted him. Wenling stared at the boy amused. He helplessly shook his head and said, "Boy, you don't have to play any tricks. Just say it directly if you want the diagram arrays. You've bothered me for a couple of days now. Even if you don't feel annoyed about it, I will." Noticing that Wenling had seen through his thoughts, Mu Chen could only scratch his head awkwardly. Diagram arrays were considered to be the thing which was valued the most by a spiritual array master. He had felt guilty about asking to look through Wenling's collection of diagram arrays. Wenling stared at the awkward Mu Chen and let out a laugh. Then, he beckoned Mu Chen over and said, "From tomorrow onwards, I'll seclude myself and attempt to break through to a rank 2 spiritual array master. When I advance to a rank 2 spiritual array master, the previous diagram arrays are not suitable for me anymore. It's fine if I teach it to you." When Mu Chen heard this, his face was suddenly filled with delight. "How many spiritual seals can you condense right now?" Wenling stared at Mu Chen and asked. 18 seals. Mu Chen pondered for a moment before speaking. Because of his cultivation, the spiritual energy within his body had gradually become stronger. Therefore, the amount of spiritual energy required to condense seals had increased. Although Wenling was mentally prepared for it, he could not help but smack his lips when he heard Mu Chen saying this. The latter's talent in spiritual arrays was considerably shocking. With 18 spiritual seals, it is considerable to be quite excellent amongst the rank 1 spiritual array masters. The Devouring Tiger Blaze spiritual array that I taught you previously was one of top 3 most powerful spiritual arrays that I know. Wenling smiled. He clenched his hand and a scroll containing a flashing diagram array emerged. This diagram array is called 9 Heavenly Lightning Spiritual Array. It is considered to be my strongest spiritual array. When Mu Chen heard this, his eyes suddenly lit up. This was Mr. Wenling's strongest spiritual array. This spiritual array requires a total of 20 spiritual seals. Among the rank 1 spiritual arrays, it is considered to be at the pinnacle. Of course, the arrangement of this spiritual array is considered to be quite complicated and is comparable to a few rank 2 spiritual arrays. I originally thought that you would not be able to touch upon it yet, but since you are able to enter the heart array state, it will greatly reduce the difficulty level. As he mentioned the heart array state, Wenling's face was filled with envy. To a spiritual array master, that state was something that they desire dearly. Once this 9 Heavenly Lightning spiritual array is successfully arranged, nobody within the spiritual rotation stage could block it. Even spirit stage initial phase powerhouses would not underestimate it. Mu Chen could hear his heart pounding. So this 9 Heavenly Lightning spiritual array was actually this powerful. I'll hand this diagram array over to you. However, you must remember not to act recklessly if you do not feel certain that you can arrange it, so that you will be able to avoid being hit by the backlash of the spiritual array. Wen Ling handed the diagram array over to Mu Chen and warned him seriously. Yes. Mu Chen hurriedly responded. He carefully took the diagram array and spread it open slowly. A flash of lightning entered his eyes. To any ordinary person, a complicated mess emerged. However, to a spiritual array master, a diagram array filled with mysterious trajectories had emerged within their eyes. Mu Chen stood at that spot and stared at the diagram array within his hand. His expression was mesmerizing as if he was immersed within the diagram array. When Wen Ling noticed this, he smiled faintly and quietly left the courtyard. When Mu Chen woke up from his mesmerizing state, the color of the sky had slowly become dark and he hurriedly returned back to his room. During the next couple of days, he spent all his concentration on the 9 heavenly lightning spiritual array. However, he knew that it was impossible for him to arrange this spiritual array right now even with the help of the heart array state. Therefore, he did not act recklessly and instead studied it over and over again. This allowed him to firmly memorize these complex spiritual energy light beam trajectories. For a full 5 days, Mu Chen was immersed in his study about the spiritual array. Until one day, he suddenly heard a noisy sound coming from outside the courtyard, only now did he walk out while frowning. Then, he noticed a few guards rushing over to the foreyard. Based on the atmosphere, it seemed that something was wrong. What happened? Mu Chen stopped a guard and asked in a deep voice. Little Lord. When the guard saw Mu Chen, he hurriedly bowed down. Then, he hesitated for a moment before saying. A big problem occurred. One of our Mu territory's cities suffered an attack and the city lord, Chen Xiong, was killed. When Mu Chen heard this, the color of his face suddenly changed. Chapter 90. Mangyin Mountain. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Uncle Xiong was killed. When he heard the guard's words, Mu Chen's breathing stopped for a moment and his hands clenched tightly together. The Mu territory's 5 city lords, Duan Wei, Chen Xiong and the others, were all loyal individuals, who had helped Mu Feng conquer the lands. In the end, they had finally managed to create the Mu territory within the northern spiritual realm. When Mu Chen was small, he had received a lot of care from them and shared feelings with them. Thus, the sudden news of Chen Xiong's death made his face completely pale and filled him with anger. Who? Mu Chen took a deep breath and suppressed his anger and killing intent within his heart. His face darkened as he charged towards the meeting room. No matter who did it, Mu Chen would never forgive him. When Mu Chen arrived at the meeting room, he noticed that a lot of people were surrounding it. All of their faces were filled with rage. Chen Xiong was quite bold and generous. Moreover, he had great popularity within the Mu territory. Coupled with the fact that he was a veteran general for the Mu territory, he was respected by everyone. Since he was suddenly killed, everybody had become furious. The little lord has arrived. Everybody hurried to bow when they saw Mu Chen rushing over. Then, they got out of the way and watched Mu Chen with admiring eyes. When Mu Chen defeated Lu Mubai during the entry competition and demonstrated a frightening degree of strength, they noticed that his combat abilities had surpassed even the other city lords like Duan Wei. Mu Chen nodded his head and entered the meeting room. At that moment, rage filled the entire meeting room. Mu Feng sat at the head of the table and had ferocious eyes as if he wanted to devour people. Below him, Zhou Ye's face was also extremely terrifying. Duan Wei, what on earth happened? Mu Feng glanced at Mu Chen, who had entered and didn't say anything. His dark eyes turned towards Duan Wei and asked. Duan Wei gritted his teeth and said. According to the information we have obtained, it was done by Mangyin Mountain. Mangyin Mountain. Mu Chen frowned. In the northern spiritual realm, there were many other forces aside from the 9 territories. And this Mang Yin mountain was considered as one of the strongest among the other forces. Their strength was not too far apart from the 9 territories and were known as the strongest underworld forces within the northern spiritual realm. We never interfere with the Mang Yin mountain and would mind our own businesses. Why would they suddenly attack us? Killing intent flashed through Zhou Ye's eyes while he asked this. The Mang Yin mountain has secretly been in contact with the Lu territory. This matter must be related to the Lu territory. Mu Feng narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a cold voice. The Lu territory. It's those trashes again. Did they really think that our Mu territory is afraid of them? Zhou Yi smacked the back of his hand and shouted out in anger. Mu Chen's eyes were also completely cold. If it was the Lu territory, it might be related to the fact that he seized the seated entry. With Lu Qingtian's personality, he would definitely do something. What should we do right now? Mang Yin Mountain has already attacked our Mu territory and killed one of our city lords. If we do not act, I'm afraid that it would cause great damage to our reputation. Zhou Yi said in a deep voice. Mu Feng slowly placed his palm on top of his teacup on the table. Then, he suddenly pressed his palm down and turned the teacup into powder. His tone was as cold as a blade and he said. How can we ignore it? My Mu territory will definitely decimate this Mang Yin mountain. The boss of the Mang Yin mountain, Yang Gui, is someone at the spirit stage initial phase. Under his command, there are 2 individuals that have reached the spiritual rotation stage late phase. If we're going to attack, then let me personally lead the team. Zhou Yi said. When Mu Feng heard this, he hesitated slightly before nodding his head. He would have liked to personally lead the troops. However, since the Lu territory had thoughts about his Mu territory, he must take charge on guarding Mu city and watch over the Lu territory. This way, they would be able to avoid having their elite troops being eliminated by the Lu territory when they were sent out. Zhou Ye's strength was also at the spirit stage initial phase. By bringing over elite troops, there was no need to fear the Mang Yin mountain. Dad, I'll go together with Uncle Zhou. Beside him, Mu Chen, who had been listening to the conversation, suddenly spoke up. Mu Feng frowned and said. It's too dangerous. Dad, with my strength, unless a spirit stage personally attacks me, nobody can pose a threat to me. Mu Chen said with a faint smile. With this, Mu Feng hesitated. He only now remembered that Mu Chen was considered to be an expert. Among the Mu territory's experts, nobody could really have an advantage in a fight against him aside from himself and Zhou Yi. Since little Mu has the heart to do this, then let him come with me. He is considered to be quite excellent with his strength right now. Moreover, he is proficient in spiritual arrays and will be a big help. Zhou Yi smiled and said. Mu Feng thought for a moment before he nodded. Indeed, Mu Chen's combat abilities were in no way inferior to Duan Wei and the others. If he went as well, it would be a big help. Then, you should follow and head out. However, you have to remember to listen to Uncle Zhou's arrangements. If you disobey the commands and recklessly charge out, I will not forgive you. Mu Feng warned him seriously. The Mang Yin mountain was quite greedy and selfish. Moreover, they would be extremely vicious when they fight. If they harbored any underestimation towards them, they would probably be overturned. Okay. Mu Chen nodded. A cold light flashed through his eyes. Mang Yin Mountain. Since you've dared to attack our Mu territory, then you should be prepared for a bloodbath. When Zhou Yi acts, he would do everything at lightning speed. Once he made his decision, he would immediately execute it. He spent less than 2 hours to summon hundreds of elite troops. Then, he brought the 2 city lords, Duan Wei, Tai Lang and Mu Chen as they charged straight out of the Mu territory and headed towards the western direction of the Mu territory. Mang Yin Mountain was located at the Mang Yin Mountain Range. It was connected to the Mu territory's west borders. The Xiong city that Chen Xiong was guarding was located at that location. It protected the borders of the Mu territory. However, it was also because of this that the Xiong city was the first target of Mang Yin Mountain. Chen Xiong was even personally killed by the boss of Mang Yin Mountain, Yang Gui. When Mu Chen and the others arrived at Xiong city, the day was approaching sunset. The city, which originally bustled with popularity, had its city gates destroyed. The guards at the gate were all looking frightened and constantly scanned the area vigilantly. Zhou Yi directly brought the troops into the center of the city. The awful killing intent in the atmosphere attracted a lot of surprised gazes. However, when they noticed that the leader was Zhou Yi, their hearts jumped. It seemed that the Mu territory was quite furious. They would even send out a spirit stage powerhouse. Zhou Yi and the others directly rushed to the city lord's estate. At that location, a middle-aged man was waiting for them a long time ago. When he saw them, he hurriedly rushed forward. Master Zhou, little lord. This person was the vice-city lord of Xiong City. His surname was Cheng while his name was Yong. Since Chen Xiong was killed, he temporarily managed Xiong City. However, his appearance was covered with bandages and showed that he had suffered severe injuries when they were under attack by the Mang Yin Mountain. Zhou Yi waved his hand and sat down in the living room of the city lord estate. His eyes darkened and he said, "Are there any movements from the Mang Yin Mountain? We have been monitoring them during this period of time. However, they retreated back into the Mang Yin Mountain range ever since they killed the city lord and did not cause any other commotions." Qing Yong quickly replied. "It seems that bastard, Yang Gui, knows that the Mu territory will not forgive him that easily. He's only acting like a coward right now," Zhou Yi said with a cold expression. "Master Zhou, Mang Yin Mountain range is extremely steep and they have tightly guarded some paths that we must pass. If we were to forcibly attack, there will be a lot of casualties," Qin Yong said. L.RG Mang Yin Mountain Range was quite high in altitude. Even for a spirit stage powerhouse like Zhou Yi, it was impossible for him to fly up there. Unless it was a powerhouse, who had ingested a spiritual beast's soul essence which possessed a flying ability like Mu Feng, it would be impossible for them to get there. Moreover, this was only limited to its user. It was not realistically possible to bring that many men up there. Moreover, the most troublesome thing isn't this. The locations near the Mang Yin Mountain range were infested by the underworld forces within the northern spiritual realm. Aside from the Mang Yin Mountain, there are other underworld forces there. They have a bit of fear towards the 9 territories. However, if we were to charge in, we would be prompting them to join forces against a common enemy. This way, it would be quite troubling for us." Qing Yong sighed and said. When Mu Chen heard these words, he frowned. It seemed that this matter wasn't as simple as he thought. Aside from Mang Yin Mountain, which underworld forces are the most powerful? Zhou Yi asked in a solemn voice. "It's 9 Dragon City. Their strength is only second to Mang Yin Mountain. Moreover, they have quite a lot of power to rally supporters among the underworld forces. If they were willing to help, we would be able to directly cross through the Mang Yin Mountain range and charge straight into the Mang Yin Mountain's lair." Qin Yong thought for a moment and said. "Who's the leader of 9 Dragon City?" "Lei Shan, he is also someone with the strength of a spirit stage initial phase." "Lei Shan, huh?" Zhou Yi nodded his head slightly. He had a vague impression of this name as he was a well-known powerhouse within the northern spiritual realm. Back in the days, they had met before. However, they were only acquaintances and Zhou Yi did not have a close relationship with him. "I'll bring some men to 9 Dragon City tomorrow." Zhou Yi pondered as he spoke. The matter right now was quite troubling. If they were able to get acquainted with 9 Dragon City, it would be much easier to deal with the situation. Otherwise, it would be quite troubling. Early in the morning of the second day, Zhou Yi brought Mu Chen, Duan Wei and the others towards 9 Dragon City. They did not bring too many troops over. After all, the underworld forces were quite cautious. If they brought too many men over, it may cause Nine Dragon City to be alert of them. Nine Dragon City was located on the north side of the Mang'en mountain range and it guarded several roads. Merchant teams would have to take the initiative to pay a toll to pass through. And towards these merchants, who knew how to behave, Nine Dragon City would not cause any trouble. Although they were underworld forces, they still wished for peace and wealth. Nobody enjoyed fighting bloody battles. Zhou Yi and the others headed directly to Nine Dragon City. After 2 hours, they reached Nine Dragon City. However, what welcomed them was a tightly shut city gate and a few wary gazes from the shadows. Zhou Yi stared at the tightly closed city gates and frowned. It seemed that Nine Dragon City had expected that the Mu territory would head over here. Based on its action, were they planning on not helping? Friend from Nine Dragon City, could you notify Leader Lei that Mu territories Zhou Yi wishes to meet him? Zhou Yi sat on his horse and cupped his hands on his mouth as he shouted out. The shout was wrapped by dense spiritual energy and emitted out from midair. My dad has secluded himself for training. He is unable to meet with guests, so please leave. After Zhou Yi shouted, a cold voice sounded out from the top of the city gates. Everybody's gazes turned towards that location and noticed a vigorous figure emerging. It was a young girl dressed in green clothes. She had a slim figure and her tightly fit clothes highlighted her slender body. Her appearance was originally quite beautiful. However, her short hair made her seem quite valiant. At that moment, she had crossed her arms and stared down from above at Mu Chen and the others with slightly pouted lips. When Zhou Yi heard this, he let out a faint smile and said, "My apologies. If we cannot meet with Leader Lei today, we would not be able to leave that easily. I hope that this miss would open the city gates. You want to charge in forcibly? Then, you'll have to ask whether I will agree to it." The girl lifted her eyebrow and let out a grunt. She gripped her slender hand and a spiritual seal emerged on her fingertips. When Mu Chen saw the spiritual seal, his eyes were filled with surprise. The girl in front of him was actually a spiritual array master.